Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Juta Padakamalam Sri Gurun.
Hare Krishna. Welcome back to the Bhakti Shastri course, study of Bhagavad Gita. We are currently in the first chapter. In our previous lesson, we were covering the opening verses of the Bhagavad Gita. We were looking at aspects of Prabhupada's mood and mission as revealed in the preface. In verses 1 to 22, we were looking at the liberal nature of the Brahman with the example of Dronacharya, different examples of Duryodhana's diplomatic comments, Arjuna depicting his flag with Hanuman, and Arjuna's ordering Krishna. We were also discussing the appropriate understanding of Prabhupada's comment about being trained up to kill the demons. We'll carry on with the remaining verses of the first chapter in this session today. Let's have a look at an overview of the first chapter. Dhritarashtra's doubts, as he inquired, Kim Akurvata, what did they do? Have they assembled on the battlefield? As Prabhupada explained in his purport. Duryodhana's diplomacy, we discussed in our previous lesson. Signs of victory of the Pandavas. Krishna as Bhakta Vatsal, who's very inclined toward reciprocative dealings with his dear devotees. And the rest of the chapter, which we'll be looking at today, deal with Arjuna's reasons for withdrawing from the fight. Yesterday, we were discussing the opening words of the first verse, Dhammakshetra, and the significance. Towards the end of the Bhagavad Gita, in the 18th chapter, Adyeshtate cha yamimam dharmam samvadam abhyayo jnana yagyena tenaham ishta shram iti me mati. I declare that he who studies this sacred conversation of ours worships me with his intelligence. So the dharmyam samvadam means means a complete discussion of, a complete analysis of. The vad means to describe, and samvad means a complete description. So in the Dharmya Samvad, Krishna explains everything about Dharma. As the Supreme Personality of Godhead, it's the responsibility of Krishna as the ultimate authority to come and to establish the ultimate principles of Dharma. Just like in a recent history, there was an event called demonetization in India. And all of a sudden, our 500 and 1,000 rupee notes became useless. I remember seeing one picture on the news of the seller of the muri, masala muri, that's the puff rice with other spices that you can buy at the boat stand, the boat gut. And they're expert. They make the little masala muri, and then they have a little piece of newspaper, and whoosh, they fold it up, and they give you. So he was giving the masala muri in 1,000 rupee notes, because the paper wasn't of any other value. So it was interesting that who announced that to the nation. It wasn't the finance minister, it wasn't anyone in the finance department, it was the prime minister of the country, the chief executive officer. And why he personally announced, because if he doesn't make the announcement, then the people may always think, well, maybe there's a different opinion on this. Let's go to the highest authority. So when the Prime Minister himself comes and speaks, then everybody realizes that this is the ultimate decision, and it requires the ultimate authority to come and present that. So similarly, God himself, Sambhavami Juge Juge. In each and every yuga, he appears to establish the authorized principles of religion for that age. And Dharmyam Samvadam, as Krishna is explaining here, that at the battle of Kurukshetra, on the field of Kurukshetra, the religious field, he will explain everything about Dharma. And in order to do that, he requires someone to be inquiring from him. And specifically, that person also needs to be somewhat, have the sort of questions that the common people will ask. So yesterday in our lesson we were discussing how Arjuna requested Krishna to bring the chariot between the two armies. Now in text 25 of chapter 1, Vyas goes on to describe where Krishna actually took Arjuna. Bhishma Drona Pramokyataha Pashaitan Samavetan Kurun iti. Bringing Arjuna directly in front of Bhishma and Drona, and in a rather casual way, Krishna says, Pashaitan Samavetam Kurunati. Just see, it is the Kurus who are assembled here. And he's particularly bringing Pramukhyata right in the front of Bhishma and Drona in order to induce Arjuna's bewilderment. Because seeing his grandfather, the Pitamaha, Bhishmadev, and his teacher, his guru, Drona, standing before him, ready to fight, then he became affected by that. He became bewildered. And the subsequent verses, Arjuna, he begins to give reasons, give arguments, substantiating his decision to withdraw from the battle. So the remainder of the chapter 1, the Sanskrit for chapter 1, Arjuna, Bisha Joga, Arjuna's lamentation, Arjuna's bewilderment. In text 27, Arjuna explains for the reason of compassion. In text 30 to 35, for enjoyment. Text 36, 43 to 40, and 2.5, the sinful reactions that I will incur if I fight. And text chapter 1, 37 to 43, the destruction of the dynasty. Let us analyze these arguments in more detail for a clearer understanding. So in text 27, Arjuna mentions Kripaya Parayabhishto. Paraya Kripa, the higher grade of compassion. Prabhupada's translating with, when the son of Kunti, Arjuna, saw all these different grades of friends and relatives, he became overwhelmed with compassion. This is in relation to all of the suffering, all of the violence, all of the killing that went on in a battle. Actually, when you hear a description of the Mahabharata, the battle scenes are very gruesome, with rivers of blood in which are flowing torsos of men, along with limbs, severed heads, arms, etc. Body parts of elephants have been chopped up in the battle, in rivers of blood. So we're talking about a lot of suffering. Describes that 64 million soldiers were present on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Within 18 days they were all killed. So that's a lot of blood shed, a lot of suffering, and Arjuna is thinking that weighs up to be quite a lot. All of those wives will be lamenting, all of those children will be orphans, all of this just for us to take the kingdom. It's not worth it. Out of compassion for the general soldiers and the society who are involved at large, better to withdraw from this battle. Now regarding enjoyment, King Bogai, where will be the enjoyment? O Govinda, of what avail to us are a kingdom, happiness, or even life itself, when all those for whom we may desire them are now arrayed on the battlefield? What pleasure will be derived from killing the sons of Dhritarashtra? Prabhupada's commenting, everyone wants to show his opulence to friends and relatives, but Arjuna fears that all his relatives and friends will be killed on the battlefield and he will be unable to share his opulence after victory. Just like Facebook, we like to share our victories amongst our friends. Any new thing you buy, or you go someplace, and you like to share that, and in that way the enjoyment is enhanced. So if you have no friends on Facebook, then you won't be sharing anything. So similarly, without any family, without any relatives, then what will be the use? What will be the enjoyment in sitting there having the kingdom at the expense of the death of all these family relatives? So Arjuna is arguing that there'll be no material enjoyment for me if I fight in this battle. Prabhupada's commenting, he's thinking Krishna is not so important, my family is important, although Arjuna is a devotee, therefore he's a Kanishta Adhikari. In the lower stage of devotion, one may be interested in Krishna consciousness, but his real interest is how to improve this material life. This is interesting, which we'll explore in more detail shortly. How is it that the exalted associate of the Lord, who is a friend of the Lord, who can order the Lord, just like a very intimate friend, can be considered a Kanishta Adhikari, or in the lower stage of devotion? So how is this possible? We'll discuss shortly. Regarding sinful reactions, papam evashrayed ashman. Sin will overcome us if we slay such aggressors. And particularly Arjuna is concerned here about slaying the guru, Drona, and the great exalted, highly respectable grandfather Bhishma. Prabhupada's commenting in his purports that even if one is justification, one should not even offer a verbal fight with one's superiors. What to speak of taking up weapons and standing opposite them in the battlefield and killing them. So Arjuna is thinking that this would be a greatly sinful, contravening the principles of Dharma. And for the reason that he will incur so much sinful reaction, he wants to withdraw from the fight. In texts 37 to 43, the first chapter, Arjuna proposes how there will be a major disruption in the steadiness, in the peacefulness, in the standards of the society if there is the death of the family elders. And he's commenting that if the family elders are killed, then the traditions, that's called the Varna Dharma, and the Kula Dharma, the traditions that family passes on from one generation to the next, that's called the Kula Dharma. Arjuna made this analysis 5,000 years ago. However, we can see that this analysis is also very much reflective of circumstances we find in modern society today. Because the elder generation are not of any use to the younger generation whose priorities are simply materialism. In the past, when society and the family unit was more based upon values of integrity, values of respect, values of tradition, the elder members of the family were very much appreciated. But in modern society, values, things which are important to us, material success, prosperity, wealth, and because the elderly members of the family practically don't contribute to the prosperity and the increasing the financial situation of the family, they're not really considered to be of much use. In the Western countries, the elderly people are simply put into old people's homes and they're forgotten about. In this way, traditions of the past, the family traditions, are very quickly degrading in the modern age. Strishu dushtashu. And the class of womanhood is being degraded in modern times. And like, for example, of course, in the West, it's very blatant. When they're selling the automobiles, they have the young lady in bikini lying on the bonnet of the automobile. Somehow or other, people think that this is acceptable. It is such a degradation of womanhood. Another example comes to mind in the boxing matches and between the rounds. Of course, probably you exalted, learned Vaishnav theologians don't watch boxing matches, but if you do, you'll see in between the rounds, they could simply put a sign up saying round 5, round 6, but instead they have the ladies with the bikini and the high heel come into the boxing ring, and all the guys are there watching the boxing match, and then when they're quite looking forward to the round finishing, because they can get to see the girl again as she comes out and walks around round 6, and they're all there. This is the standard in the Western society, that there's such a degradation of what to speak of motherhood. Motherhood is an embarrassment which gets in the way of your political career. So this degradation of womanhood we can see very much a prominent feature of modern culture. And even in cultures where feminine nature, womanhood is protected, the atheistic governments, they're not even allowing you to protect the feminist features, and has to be displayed, cannot be covered, has to be displayed, illegal to cover. This is very atheistic approach and a very materialistic approach, and so much lacking the principles of traditional Vaishnav culture. And we can see that in an environment where there is less chastity and there is unrestricted intermingling of men and women, then unwanted progeny, children are not really cared for, they're not really planned. They're unwanted. They are simply an unwanted result of our enjoyment. And children born in such consciousness, then they can create all sorts of havoc for society at large. So much so that we regularly hear now in European countries and in North America that Students come to school and they kill their fellow students and the teachers, many of them, just because they got some bad marks or something, or they were treated in an inappropriate way. So in this way we can see that the analysis that Arjuna made 500 years ago is very much pertinent for our modern society. Adhanama abhibhavat Krishna puradu shanti kolashtriha strishu dushtashu vaishnaya jayate vanasankara. And with the rise in irreligion, there will be pradu shanti kolashtriya, degradation of womanhood, and then dushtashu vaishnaya, there will be the rise, strishu dushtashu vaishnaya jayate vanasankara. If women become degraded, then there will be rise in unwanted progeny, and that will lead to complete devastation of all community projects and welfare activities. So in this way, Arjuna is proposing a flowchart of events that will end up in creating complete havoc for society at large, and the standard procedures of the varnashram system will all be lost as a result of killing, as a result of the death of the family, of the elderly family members. And in this way, Arjuna poses his arguments for withdrawing from the battle. In text 46, Arjuna cast aside his bow and arrows, his mind overwhelmed with grief, and he got down off the chariot. So this is quite remarkable. First of all, we have to consider that Arjuna's position is very extraordinary because he's an eternal associate of the Lord. So how is it that he can be in such a circumstance where he's become completely incapable of performing his prescribed duties? This is a standard quality of the Kshatriyas, that they're inclined to take control and to give shelter. And they felt that at Virat the cows weren't properly being protected, and therefore as Kshatriyas it's their duty to protect, and they came and they took all those cows back to Hastinapura, and they will be protected there. This is Kshatriya life. So news was received at the palace, and at that time Virat and his army were at another place fighting another campaign. And so the minister said, well, no army here, what to do? And the prince, his name was Uttara, Uttara Raj Putra. And he said, you don't know, even the army may be away, but the son of King Virat, Uttara, I am here. I will go, I will defeat those Kaurya rascals, Kaurava warriors, and bring back the cows. And then he said, oh, no chariot driver. No, won't be able to go. And then Yudhisthira, who was there, who was a minister of Virat, Yudhisthira said, well, we have Brihadnala. Brihadnala was Arjuna. He was disguised as a dance teacher in the palace of Virat. We have Brihadnala. He can teach dance. He can also drive chariot. And Arjuna said, yes, sure, we can go. I can drive the chariot. So, and then the queens of Virat and the princesses, in a joking way, they said to Uttara, Rajputra, oh, go and collect some cloth, some little cloth. Go and collect the headdress of each of the great Kaurava warriors and bring back for us. Oh yes, Rajuttara, yes. So as he took Arjuna and they got on the chariot, they went out, and then they saw on the horizon the vast army of the Kuru warriors, and there's Bhishma, and there's Dhritarashtra, there's Drona, there is Karna, there is Duryodhana, all the great warriors. They're taking the cows. Just seeing the army arrayed on the horizon, the Rajputra, Uttara, he became completely overwhelmed, traumatized with fear, jumped down off the chariot, he's running off. Arjuna's saying, come back. So the warriors of the Kauravas, they looked and they saw at the distance this chariot, and they're laughing at the warrior who's jumped off and is running away, and the chariot driver who's chasing after him, trying to bring him back. And then they're all laughing. And then Bhishma, he begins to look more closely, and he notices, look at the shoulders on that chariot driver. They resemble a lion, and that chariot driver is walking with a gait of a lion. He resembles Arjuna, and there's the marks of a bow on his shoulder. And I think that the chariot driver is Arjuna. he warned the soldiers of the Kuru army, beware. He said, be prepared for a great slaughter. We are facing the Pandava Arjuna. At that time, Arjuna had got on the chariot and he told Raj Uttara, you drive the chariot. Actually, I am Pandava Arjuna and our weapons are here. We left in the tree. And in that way, went into battle. And single-handedly, Arjuna, he defeated all of the great Maharathis of the Kaurava army. He defeated Duryodhana. He defeated Karna, lying unconscious on the chariot. Dhritarashtra, defeated them all. And he brought the cows back. And he told Rajputra Uttara, he told him, you climb on each of the chariots of the great Maharathis and you take a little cloth there from their headdress. So in this way, Raj Uttara, he came back and of course, Arjuna didn't take credit and said, he came back with the cloth of the great, here's the cloth of Karna, here's the headpiece of Duryodhana, and gave to all the princesses. They were amazed. How is it that you brought the cows back? You defeated the Kaurava army. But this time, King Virat had come back and he was so much celebrating his son's victory. Today, my son, you have proven to be the jewel of our family and the great family of kings. And what a heroic act you have done today. At that time, Yudhisthira, who was listening, he said, well, if you had Brihad Nala as your chariot driver, then what foe wouldn't you be able to conquer? So hearing this, Virat, he became very agitated. He said, you steal my moment of glory? Here I am when my son has become a great hero and you're giving credit to the chariot driver? He was very agitated. And at that time he took, because Yudhisthira used to play chess with Virat Raj, he took the chess piece and he threw it and hit Yudhisthira in the nose. And just as blood began to pour from his nose, then quickly Draupadi, she came with a pot and she caught that blood drop. Because Yudhisthira ordered her. Because Yudhisthira knew that Arjuna had taken a vow that anyone who caused a drop of blood to fall from Yudhisthira onto the floor at a time when he's not in battle, anyone who caused a drop of blood of Yudhisthira's to hit the floor, immediately I will kill that person in their whole dynasty. Arjuna had taken a vow. So Yudhisthira quickly, he was holding his nose, he quickly requested Draupadi, who was the maidservant, bring the pot, like that. So, as they were in incognito at that time. So interesting that Arjuna, just a few months before this incident, he single-handedly defeated all the Kauravas. So how is it at this time that he's become such a turnaround? He's become so bewildered. How is it possible? Prabhupada comments in the introduction how it's possible. Being an associate of Lord Krishna, Arjuna was above all ignorance, but Arjuna was put into ignorance on the battlefield of Kurukshetra just to question Lord Krishna about the problems of life, so that the Lord could explain them for the benefit of human generations, for the benefit of future generations of human beings, and chalk out the plan of life. Then man could act accordingly and perfect the mission of life. So for the Lord to be able to respond, and as Prabhupada mentions here in a very quaint analogy, to chalk out the plan of life, chalk it out, to lay it out, to describe it, to map it out so that it can very clearly be followed. In order to do that, then Arjuna required to be put into ignorance and to ask appropriate questions for Krishna to be able to instruct him in the Gita Upadesh. So he's an eternal associate of the Lord and a friend of Lord Krishna, but he's been put into Maya, like that of the conditioned soul, so that Krishna can speak the Bhagavad Gita and deliver him from that Maya. And we'll see at the end of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is asking Arjuna, Kachchit etat shrutam partha. Have you heard this, partha? Etat ekagrena chetasaha, with ekagrita cheta, with attention. Kachchit agyana samoha, where is your ignorance and bewilderment now? Kachchit agyana samoha. Pranastas te Dhananjay. Has it not been completely destroyed as a result of me answering your questions and me imparting upon you the transcendental instructions of Bhagavad Gita? And Arjuna explained that, yes, noshta moha, my bewilderment has been destroyed. Smriti labhata, I've regained my memory. Prasadat mayachita, by your mercy, infallible one. Shtito ajmi gatashandeha, I'm ready, all my doubts have gone away. Karishe bachanam tava, and I'm ready to perform whatever you request. So this is the effect of hearing Bhagavad Gita. It will remove one's ignorance. it will revive one's realizations and one's understanding of one's identity as being the eternal servant of Krishna. And upon hearing Bhagavad Gita, one will become inspired, one will become enthused to serve Krishna. In text 40, Arjuna is explaining, Adama abhivavat Krishna pradoshanti kolastriya strishu dushtashu vaishnaya jayate vanashankaraha. When irreligion is prominent in the family, O Krishna, the women of the family become polluted, and from the degradation of womanhood, O descendant of Vrishni, comes unwanted progeny. In the purport, Prabhupada explains, as children are very prone to be misled, women are similarly very prone to degradation. According to Chanakya Pandit, women are generally not very intelligent and therefore not trustworthy. There may be a tendency amongst Prabhus in the Krishna consciousness movement to refer to this comment of Srila Prabhupada in a way which it wasn't particularly intended to be referred to. This comment Prabhupada is mentioning for women in general. And why is the comment of Chanakya Pandit there, Shrishtu Rajakaleshu Vishwasana Vakaitavya? Because in general, women have a tendency to be more emotional and less rational in their responses to different events. And therefore, like the example is given in the Bhagavatam, 1st canto, chapter 7, when Bhima and Krishna are inclined towards executing Ashvatthama after he killed the 5 sons of Draupadi, and he released the Brahmastra weapon to kill the Parikat embryo in the womb of Uttara. So having done that, these very heinous crimes, Arjuna and Bhima, they wanted to execute Ashvatthama. And when they brought Ashvatthama bound with ropes, they brought him back to camp and threw him at the lotus feet of Draupadi. Immediately seeing Ashvatthama bound up in that way, she became compassionate. She empathized. And she requested to untie the ropes. And so she became affected by her emotional response, and that influenced the overall outcome of the incident. And Prabhupada's giving this as an example of the feminine nature as being somewhat inclined, somewhat influenced more so by emotional considerations. And therefore, under circumstances, issues may not be delegated to a person with that tendency, as they may become affected by their emotional considerations and make the wrong decision about something. That's actually the real principle behind Chanakya Pandit's comment here. And particularly with the kings, with the political leaders, then because there's so many agendas that they have to, so many obligations, so many alliances also that may be compromised situation if one places their trust in such a person. So if a Prabhu in the Krishna consciousness movement regularly uses this against a Mataji, a Vaishnavi, in an effort to minimize or to even hurt that devotee, then this is inappropriate type behavior. And Prabhupada further elaborates in lecturing on this topic that such a comment is not relevant for the Vaishnavi devotees in the Krishna consciousness movement. Chanakya Pandit says, never trust the politician and woman. Of course, when woman comes to Krishna consciousness, that position is different. We are speaking of ordinary woman. So Krishna says in another place, Striya Vaishishtata Sudra. So we are speaking of ordinary women, that's Chanakya Pandit and Prabhupada, that plus a trust should not be placed in such an ordinary woman. And we are not speaking about the Krishna conscious Vaishnavi in this situation, as Prabhupada clarifies here. And therefore, the statement that Prabhupada made in the purport, that women are prone to degradation and women are generally not very intelligent and not trustworthy, this comment should not be applied to the Vaishnavis. In the Bhagavad Gita it is said that when the women become unchaste for want of proper protection, there are unwanted children called Vana Shankara. To insult a chaste woman means to bring about disaster in the duration of life. So using this statement in an inappropriate way in reference to a Vaishnavi can bring about a great disaster in the duration of one's life, and is highly recommended to avoid that. As a natural devotee of the Lord, Arjuna did not like to retaliate against his miscreant cousins and brothers, but it was the Lord's plan that they should all be killed. This is an interesting tension that the Bhagavad Gita is creating for us. That Arjuna, he wants to withdraw from the fight, and we've already discussed today so many reasons that he's given. When we analyze Arjuna's reasons, actually they're quite substantial. Compassion and concern for the others' well-being and not to unnecessarily be violent towards them is a sound argument. The enjoyment argument is quite logical. If I kill everybody, then how are we going to enjoy everything after that? The sinful reactions argument is also very pertinent and very serious considerations for any sincere follower of spiritual life to avoid sinful reactions. And the destruction of the dynasty argument also is very logical, that killing all of these people, all of these leaders who have assembled here, then it will cause a great disruption to the subsequent development, steadiness, and maintenance of the Varnashram principles in society at large. And these are all genuinely important arguments that Arjuna has made. So it's quite a tension here. And also when Prabhupada came and in the 1960s and early 1970s was preaching Krishna consciousness at a time when the counterculture youth movement was very much against war, and particularly with the political circumstances America found themselves in at the time with the Vietnam War, so many of the young men being killed, to preach as Prabhupada mentions here, preach about to fight and to go to war is a very sensitive issue. And it's interesting that this issue is the opening issue of the Bhagavad Gita. Why is that? Later in the Bhagavatam, when he's describing Vyasadev's compilations, Prabhupada comments that Vyasadeva particularly strategized that at the time of the political intrigue and the climax, which had gone on for many, many years, when the battle and all of the warriors are assembled together on the battlefield, this moment is naturally attracting the attention of the entire world. So, because people are interested in such a political event, in that situation, Krishna speaks the Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna, so that the message can be proclaimed throughout particularly all of the leading class of humanity. So there's a strategy behind the message of Bhagavad Gita being spoken on the battle. And similarly, as Prabhupada explains, Krishna wanted the Lord's plan that they should be killed, that Krishna actually wanted the war to be enacted and the miscreants to be punished, and he wanted Arjuna to be the instrument with which the punishment was conducted. As Prabhupada comments at a later section of the second chapter, text 21, that everything has its proper utility and violence also has its utility. Now, in that purport to text 21 of chapter 2, which we encourage you to glance at in your own time, Prabhupada gives a couple of analogies. He says, like the surgeon who has a knife and he cuts open the patient, that could be considered a very violent type of an activity. So he uses violence, he cuts open the patient in order to cure the patient. And similarly, the High Court Justice, he can order some punishment for the culprit in order to rectify the culprit. And Prabhupada's commenting that if the culprit goes unpunished, then it's very detrimental because again, he'll take birth and that sinful reaction will still be pending. So it's better that they're punished in this life and that they're relieved of that sinful reaction. And the Manu Samhita actually explains that Prabhupada comments, he lists in the purport 6 types of aggressors: those who are attacking with weapons, those who do arson, those who steal one's riches, those who steal one's wife. These 6 types of aggressors actually can be killed according to the principles of the Manu Samhita, and in this way the reactions that they incurred for that will be rectified. And it's the responsibility of the king to actually impart and deliver that justice so that everyone can peacefully progress towards the goal of life. And it's the king's responsibility to administer punishment. Because traditionally, now everything has changed in the modern times, but traditionally when the kings would be dressed in their military dress with all of the medals of the victories, and this is part of the regal dress, and oftentimes, usually, they would be carrying a sword. This is the regal dress, this is the military dress, and this is the responsibility of the king with sword in hand, that he doesn't hesitate to punish the miscreants, and in that way the whole of the society remains moral and prosperous. So rather than considering that Krishna is some type of masochist, or that he likes violence, or that he likes war, we can understand that Krishna's desire to induce, Krishna's intent to induce Arjuna to fight reveals his intimacy and his affection for his devotees. Prabhupada explained, the devotee of the Lord does not retaliate against the wrongdoer, but the Lord does not tolerate any mischief done to the devotee by the miscreants. The Lord can excuse a person on his own account, but he excuses no one who has done harm to his devotee. There's a statement that Narottam Das Thakur makes, Harishtan aparade tare harinam. If one is an offender to Lord Hari, he can get relief from his offenses. Harishtan aparade tare, he can get delivered from that tare harinam, by chanting the holy name of Krishna. Tomarshtan aparade nahe paritran. Tomarshtan, but if one offends a Vaishnava, if one offends the dear servant of the Lord, nahe paritran, there is no means of rectification. Even the Lord himself cannot rectify such an offender. Even chanting Hare Krishna cannot rectify the offense of offending a Vaishnava. Therefore, the Lord was determined to kill the miscreants, although Arjuna wanted to excuse them. The great insult that the Kaurava dynasty performed to the Pandavas was very much affected the Lord. When Draupadi was insulted and humiliated in front of the assembly of the kings, and at that time Bhishma, he did not protest, Dhritarashtra did not protest. For this reason, they are also accountable for that offensive activity of trying to insult the faultless Draupadi. So that event very much affected Krishna, that they acted in that way. And similarly, Shakuni, who was relying upon reverting to the duplicitous means to try to cheat the Pandavas out of the kingdom. Karna was saying, let us challenge them, let us fight with them. And Shakuni, no, let us cheat them by duplicitous means. And as they're gambling, oh, I have won. Oh, and Yudhisthira is simply trying to follow his dharmic responsibility as the Kshatriya to accept the challenge, but even though understanding that the whole of their property will be cheated. So similarly, Krishna didn't like this type of behavior, and he wanted to punish the miscreants. So Arjuna's intent to withdraw from the battle, although so many reasons, we saw valid reasons. However, Krishna's intent was that they had to be punished. It's interesting that when, at the end of the Battle of Kurukshetra, and Karna was fighting with Arjuna, at that time, Karna's wheel of the chariot got caught in the mud, got stuck in the mud. And he got down off his chariot to remove it from the mud. And at that time, Krishna turned to Arjuna and said, kill him now. So as he took his bow and was aiming it toward Karna, Karna looked and said, well, Arjuna, you've neglected the principles of Dharma. We're not in an equal position. Now, I'm not on my chariot. I don't have my weapons. How can you kill me in this situation? Why are you not remembering the principles of Dharma? When Karna said that, Krishna immediately responded. And keep in mind that this is 14 years later. For 14 years, Krishna was simply remembering this fact, that Karna did not object when the faultless Draupadi was insulted. So when Karna asked, Arjuna, you're forgetting the principles of religion. Immediately Krishna replied, so why you didn't, now you're talking about the principles of religion, but why you didn't talk about the principles of religion when Draupadi was being insulted in that way? You kept silent. So Krishna, that hurt Krishna. And Krishna couldn't tolerate that. He can tolerate an insult to himself. He can tolerate offense to himself, but he cannot tolerate an offense to his dear devotee. And for this reason, Krishna was determined that Arjuna fight and kill the miscreants. So this whole incident, the conclusion is not that, oh, Krishna is so much inclined to war. The conclusion is Krishna is very much inclined to his dear devotees. And if you insult his dear devotees, then you're finished. If you insult his devotee, the devotee may excuse, but Krishna will not excuse. This is Krishna's position. Therefore, be careful to insult a devotee. A devotee may excuse you, but Krishna will not excuse you. Krishna is so strict. He cannot tolerate any insult to his devotee. Therefore, this arrangement of fighting, Arjuna wanted, no, let them be excused. Krishna wanted, no, you must fight, you must kill them. That brings us to the conclusion of our study of the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita. In our session today, we were discussing Arjuna's reasons for not fighting. We will further discuss those in the next session, and we'll be looking at Krishna's response to Arjuna's arguments. We looked at the progressive steps of the destruction of the dynasty, as Arjuna outlined, and we were discussing the relevance of that. We were discussing the meaning of Chanakya Pandit's statement that women are not very intelligent, and we were discussing inappropriate use of that in regard Vaishnavis in the Krishna consciousness movement. And we were discussing utility of violence, the analogies that Prabhupada gave, like the surgeon who's cutting to cure the patient, and the High Court judge who is giving the punishment in order to rectify the culprit. So in this way, Krishna was determined that the battle of Kurukshetra be fought. And even in spite of Arjuna's reluctance, Krishna was inducing Arjuna to fight the battle. We will see when Krishna responds to Arjuna's arguments, he's able to explain all of the nuances of Dharma, Varnashram Dharma and Sanatana Dharma, and we'll be discussing that in more detail in the subsequent lessons. Let's conclude with this comment from Srila Prabhupada. Bhagavad Gita is spoken by the Lord so that human society can be perfectly organized from all angles of vision, politically, socially, economically, philosophically, and religiously. From any point of view, human society can be reformed by the Krishna consciousness movement. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.